I always liked that one. Pithy, but I found him far too optimistic, Shield Captain. That quote, he replied, assumes the foe now sits indolent upon the spoils. What if they are instead present in greater number and alert to retaliatory incursion? I confess, my brother, I will happily kill them all, but still. The ship gave a shudder, as though to underline Vikalan's caution. It slowly changed course, ascending relative to the debris. "Tagitus the Unorthodox," replied Akalor, his eyes flicking across view screens. "The greater the enemy's number, the greater honor shall I do unto the Emperor by their slaughter," said Vikalan. "Choleric, my friend. I think I like that one better." Akalor saw the ghost of a smile hovering about Vikalan's mouth. Vikalan was as intellectual as every one of the 10,000, but he had a powerful love of fighting. "We are 5 custodians beneath one vexillum, Hastius," said Akalor. "Whatever foes we may meet in this place, we shall know victory over them." "I am buoyed as always by your resolute spirit," Vikalan replied. The 2 warriors fell silent. By Akalor's count, a further 2 hours, 23 minutes, 7 seconds passed before they spoke again. Early on, Ashmeln left for the Astropathicum. Akalor allowed himself to fall into a trance, absorbing each new nugget of information as the ship's augurs quested out into the system. Vikalan processed as much of the battle data as was available. The navigator confirmed the Empyreum at Gathalamor was as navigable as anything he had seen since the opening of the Cicatrix Maledictum. Getting out would be far easier than getting in. The currents were as strong as predicted. Contrary to that, after a short trance, Master of Astropaths Ashmael described teleprayer conditions in system as being entirely obscured, so that she could make no contact with any of the Gathalamorian worlds, and cautioned that the cause was a strange resonance emanating from Gathalamor itself. She informed Akalor she would commence a reading of the Emperor's Tarot for guidance. Less esoteric readings were returned. The augury arrays showed a substantial traitor presence, their vox and immaterial communications centered upon Gathalamor, but coming also from around the worlds of Randa and Cryosius's Rest. Imperial signals were faint and infrequent, and to begin with, the ship's crew feared that no servant of the Emperor remained active on the Shrine World. Yet, as the minutes ticked by, it became clear that there were still loyalist forces present. They were, however, making efforts to mask their presence. Little by little, a strategic picture emerged of the situation. A cartolith of Gathalamor was presented over the main hololithic pit. Shining seas, green forests, and great cities with interlinked streets as fine as the branchings of coral. Though much was scorched and fires burned all over the planet, it was as yet not lost. Over this, enemy and imperial positions were laid. "That's quite a fleet the enemy have, but imperial forces are holding out," said Vikalan, after a while scrutinizing the augur returns. "The largest concentration is on Gathalamor Secundus, in the city of Impresentia. It is there we should go, if we are to make landfall. Are we to proceed or withdraw? Everything the augur soak has so far detected suggests that the enemy do not possess sufficient strength in this system to hold against the Crusade fleet," said Akalor. "However," said Vikalan. "However," said Akalor, "conventional military theory cannot be applied to the followers of chaos. It is our duty to assume that there is a greater threat here, and that Gilliman's advisers were correct." "What about Colquhoun's orders?" said Vikalan. "A cautious man would withdraw." "Are you a cautious man, Vikalan?" asked Akalor, already knowing the answer. "Throne, no," he laughed. "I would like a fight." "Then you shall have one, my friend. Time presses us," Akalor said to Sangar. "The battle groups draw closer by the hour. We can learn nothing more here. Move us into the inner system. I like not Ashmeln's talk of emanations from the Shrine World, nor the effect they have upon communications. The company shall deploy via the Veilbreaker Teleportarium to the surface of Gathalamor, shipmistress." "Of course, my lord," replied Sangar. "The obfuscation engines are roused. No foe shall see us, and none shall detect your descent upon this world. I swear it by the Golden Throne." The emissaries in Parata's shield host went openly for the most part as ambassadors of the throne, but they had other roles that were not well known, for they specialized also in covert strikes. They were the subtle blade in the Emperor's arsenal. Where words failed, swords prevailed. Much powerful techno-arcana had been placed at their disposal. The obfuscation engines were one such gift, an adaptation of ancient heresy-era technology that inverted the void shields, rendering the radiance an invisible blank to even the most powerful augurs. Akalor had always thought the radiance was ironically named. The Veilbreaker Teleportarium was another ancient treasure, with a vast operational range and remarkable precision. This device alone was more precious to the Adeptus Custodes than the warship into which it had been installed. "Spend the approach gathering additional intelligence, Shipmistress," Akalor commanded. "Concentrate scans on the area around Impresentia. Find us the best place to intervene." "And once you are planet-side?" asked Sanger. "No non-essential contact. We shall meet with the surviving forces and manage the situation there," replied Akalor. "You will take the Radiance and do what you can to rally any surviving Navis Imperialis assets that may still be in system, though you are not to expose yourself if possible." "Yes, my lord," said Sanger. "May the Emperor walk with you." "It is we who walk with him, Shipmistress," corrected Akalor. He and Vikalan strode from the bridge. "This could all be a trap, you realize that," said Vikalan as they exited through the blast doors. "The enemy know the significance of this world. Their forces here are enough to deal with local planetary defense, but not what is coming. The War Master is no fool. He dangles the bait." "Absolutely he does," replied Akalor. "But I pity he who springs the jaws of a trap on us." "Splendid," growled Vikalan. "I knew I would enjoy this mission." He smiled broadly as they set off down the corridor towards their barracks. There they would prepare themselves and rouse the Adeptus Astartes to battle. "And then," thought Akalor, "we shall secure Gathalamor in the Emperor's name." Chapter 18. Saint's Gift, Archangels, Martyrs. Shani Saint's Gift ran. Her breath rasped. Each exhalation filled her mouth with the acid taste of bile. Each inhalation was a bloom of fire in her chest. She ran, though her leg muscles had turned to water. It felt like the nightmares Shani had endured as a child, aboard the Mendicant, the hauler aboard which she and her family had completed their pilgrimage to Gathalamor. In her dreams, she'd fled the rats that lived in the bilges, the ones that had made her flesh crawl with their every scratch in the ducts. In her dreams, her legs had refused to work, and her throat had refused to produce a scream. All she'd been able to manage was a reedy wheeze. The dream always ended with Shani waking just before the tide of rats engulfed her. There would be no such luck this time. She panted out a prayer, begging for mercy. But what did the Emperor know of mercy? Shani's father had died in a crowd surge the day they put down upon Gathalamor, before they even made it as far as the shrine of St. Tremandi. They laid his cane as an offering at the saint's shrine, weeks later, praying for his soul to the marble statue he had striven his entire life to see. Her older brother, Jara, had fallen in with the Bone Whittlers once it became apparent they weren't getting out of the slums. An enforcer's shotgun had sent him to join their father. Still, she and her mother had remained faithful. They made offerings of what little they had to atone for the wrongs they must have done to suffer so. And then the stars tore, and the invasion came, and they all found out how worthless the Emperor's mercy really was. She was exhausted to delirium. She had been running forever. She shouldn't have come out. She shouldn't have left the catacombs. "Oh, Emperor, forgive," she thought. "Oh, Emperor, save me. What choice did I have?" Another part of her snarled back. "There is no food down there, nothing but statues with pious faces. The Emperor protects no one." Shani fled between towering macro mausolea. The morning coated the flanks of the buildings with molten gold. It rendered everything it touched blinding, wrought everything it didn't into hard black shapes. Stone cherubim stared down at her, heads haloed by the dawn, uncaring of her fate. "They know what is coming for me," she thought desperately, "and they do nothing." A burst of gunfire crackled across the ruins. Close behind her, something heavy dislodged a spill of rubble. There was a howl, a sound so unnatural that it froze Shani's blood. She looked back, knowing even as she did so that it was a mistake, compelled by instinct she couldn't fight to do it all the same. She saw them, 5 huge and twisted shapes turned into living fire by the glory of the sunrise. She let out a breathless cry and tried to go faster, but her foot found a gap between two chunks of masonry, stuck fast, and the ground rushed up to meet her. Her hands hit sharp gravel and glass as they sought to break her fall. Something in her leg bent too far and cracked. Then her face was bouncing off the ground, and she tasted blood. She lay there for a stunned, stupid moment. Groggy, Shani rolled over. Broken bones ground in her ankle, and she screamed, a cry of despair and agony and anger. Anger at the things that had hunted her, anger at the Emperor who had allowed all this to happen to her family, to her poor mother. Gasping, shaking, drenched with sweat, Shani looked for any hope of escape, but there was nothing. They were coming closer, monsters from the darkest scripture, things her mind all but refused to accept as real. They were tall, so tall, and armor like old blood and knife blades. Oh God, Emperor, the talons and the fangs and the eyes! Despite it all, despite all he had taken from her, Shani found herself pleading. Oh God, Emperor Almighty, O Lord of angelic hosts and provider of succor. Can't do anything for yourself, so you beg the Emperor for help, a treacherous part of her said. Please, I beg you, hear your faithful servant's prayer. Like he heard when father died screaming, like when they took Jara, like... See now my peril, O God Emperor, and in your divine beneficence give sanctuary to this unworthy soul. Not that he ever has before, not that he ever will, the voice inside her said. There are other gods, and they are better. The creatures loomed over her, drool running from fangs that grew right out of their twisted helms, obscene claws and talons gleaming in the dawn light. Were they machine or flesh, or something of both? There was hunger in their glowing yellow eyes, and she prayed they would make her death swift. He won't even offer you that mercy, the voice in her mind said. You are nothing. He does not care for you at all. The glow of the dawn grew hazy as the things leaned in. One caressed her with the tip of a cruel talon, then wrapped an outsized hand around her waist and hauled her off the ground. She whimpered as her broken foot came free. They will take their time over you, and you will beg for death long before they are finished, and then you will face the blackness alone, for there is nothing, there is no mercy, there is no kindness. The Emperor hates you, said the voice in her head. A fanged maw approached her face. It seemed that the helm opened, but it was at the same time part of the face, a mix of armor and man. A long, thick tongue slipped out. Shani closed her eyes and prepared to die. A bolt of golden lightning arced up from the ground and sent one of the monstrous figures reeling. A piercing whine filled the air. The golden light of dawn was outshone by a coruscating vortex that caught up stone and shards of stained glass and spun them round. The things that had been hunting her were driven back, howling words she didn't understand. Shani was dropped like a sack of bones. She was numb with fear and could not move, but her heart soared. After everything, the Emperor had answered her prayers. The Emperor, she breathed. The Emperor protects. She found her strength and scrambled back, her broken leg dragging agonizingly over the rough ground. The creatures were in uproar, slashing at the light. A volley of thundercracks sounded from all around her. Suddenly, giants appeared, their red and gold armor steaming ghostly shapes into the dawn. Angels, the angels of our Lord, the master of mankind, croaked Shani. Her eyes found a gilt aquila hoisted high over her saviors. The fierce light of the sunrise kindled along its wingtips and reflected from the gem that formed its single eye. And she understood. Thank you, she thought, and in that moment, Shani Saint's Gift felt as though the blazing sunlight was falling into her, filling her up with a faith stronger than anything she had felt in her life. Contact front. Traitor Astartes, demonically possessed, barked Shield Captain Akalor. He raised Prosectis before the teleport flare died and squeezed the trigger built into the hilt. Unerringly aimed bolt rounds thumped into the flesh metal of a traitor and detonated so fiercely his horned head was thrown into the sky. Ichor sprayed in a fountain, but those who had given their mortal forms over to demons were not easily slain. Though open like a bloody flower, the headless traitor marine was still on his feet, pincer limbs snipping the air as a hissing nest of tentacles and eyes boiled up from its ragged neck. The storm of bolt fire that erupted from Akalor's comrades' guns engulfed the possessed. Armor ruptured, unholy flesh burst, and the befouled Chaos Space Marines were driven back. Hastius Vikalan went forward to Akalor's right. Vexilor Undire Almath Amat had Akalor's left. Pontus Varsilian, the many-gloried, and Menticulous Aswadi made up the five, and they moved out to the flanks, sentinel blades locked onto the tops of their shields, gunfire blazing over the rims. The custodians blasted the possessed to a bloody pulp. It was a catastrophic, overwhelming application of force, an engagement more akin to a firing squad than a fight. Only once the last of the demon-tainted traitors had stopped twitching did Akalor look down at the mortal woman lying in the rubble near his feet. Her face bore a beatific smile. "Emperor," she said, "Emperor be praised." "She's gone into shock," said Akalor. "Varsilian, attend to her." "Shield Captain," Varsilian acknowledged. He set his weapons aside and knelt to tend the woman, his massive armoured hands moving over her injuries expertly. "Distance to target, Hastius." Vikalan consulted his armour systems. "We've come down several miles off course, outside the port's perimeter, due to empiric interference from whatever is going on here, I'd say. Poor fortune for us, good fortune for her that we did so," he said, gesturing at the wounded civilian. "Even the Radiants cannot achieve a wholly traceless teleportation, especially from such range. We will have been noticed, and we need to relocate swiftly," said Akalor. "That was a louder and messier arrival than I would have preferred." "Blades would have taken longer," said Vikalan, still looking down at the wounded woman. "Come, get her up. We're moving out," said Akalor. Varsilian locked his shield to the back of his armour and gathered up the woman, speaking soothing words as she cried at the pain. He bent to retrieve his sword. "We could consider leaving her," said Vikalan quietly. "Then what would we be?" Akalor said. "Look at this place." He swept his gaze around the ruins of Gathalamor in Presentia. "How many people like her have died here, and for what? They are slaughtered before the images of their protector, no doubt crying out his name to the end. Imagine the power that gives our foes. Imagine how they must feel. I say no. We can save her with minimal inconvenience, and we shall. Varsilian will fight almost as well carrying her as he will unburdened." He looked to the blue morning sky. "No sign of the enemy fleet, but we will go under cover where we can." Vikalan snorted. "Aye, my friend. No point travelling all the way from Terra just to be evaporated by a land strike." He pointed to where the spires rose up in toothed ranks, almost as steeply as the walls of the outer palace. They crowned a range of low hills, and behind the spires were the silhouettes of buildings common to void ports the galaxy over. "It's that way," he said. The custodians made speed through the ruins, their gen-enhanced frames pushing them over uneven ground that would have caused a mortal group to founder. In less than an hour they were approaching the outer bounds of the Ascension Stair district. They approached from the east, where the ground leapt up in steep cliffs, and the city climbed by switch-backed streets, ascending several hundred feet before the ground levelled again. They climbed this deserted stair until they saw the port ahead once more. Weapons boomed not far away, and they saw void discharge soiling the atmosphere to the west. "That is the centre of their resistance. All intercepted communications emanate from that tower," said Vikalan, pointing. Akalor followed. The tower looked to be to the south of the port's heart, purely religious in design, for although it was of sufficient height to serve as minor traffic control or a comms hub, it was lacking the arrays to perform either role. "A good site for a command centre. We are close," said Akalor. There came a chime from the auspexes in their helms. "Shield Captain, movement, 200 yards out, closing," voxed Almath Amat. "Power armour signatures." "Guard stance," Akalor ordered. "You have this habit of speaking too soon," said Vikalan. All of them were ready, blades up, shields presented in a ring of auramite, Varsilian in the middle with the woman. But Vikalan set his blade on his shoulder. "You have signum keys," said Aswadi, letting his guard down. "I do," said Vikalan. Armored figures emerged from the archways of an administratum building. Their gunmetal armor shimmered in the sunrise. "Adeptus Sororitas, Order of the Argent Shroud," Vikalan said. "Here is a more hospitable welcome." 12 battle sisters came out onto the street. They were all battle-worn. They went helmed until they approached, when their leader revealed her face, and Akalor saw that her eyes shone with something close to rapture. Then they all removed their helmets, as if they wished to drink in the sight of the custodians without the intervention of their auto-senses. As one, the battle sisters knelt and bowed their heads with deep reverence. "Praise be," they proclaimed. "Praise be." Their leader stood. "Praise the Emperor for your arrival. I did not think to see so glorious a sight as you, most holy lords, in my lifetime. I give thanks that I have borne witness to your glory, and stand in the presence of those who have stood in the presence of him on terror. Praise, praise, praise," she shouted. "Sister, hail and well met," said Akalor. "We go to meet with your leaders. Our presence upon Gathalamor is not yet known to the enemy, so we must go with some haste." Over the squad vox, he heard Vikalan chuckle. Most custodians respected the faith of the Adeptus Sororitas, but Vikalan had never been able to take the religion of the Adeptus Ministorum seriously. Of course," said the battle sister. "You bring hope to us all, and it should be shared. In my selfishness, I seek to enjoy this moment for my own pleasure." "She'll be at the scourging bench later for that," Vikalan said, via private channel. Akalor held up a finger to silence his friend. "What is your name?" Akalor asked. "Forgive me. I am Palatine Grecia Emmanuel, of the Order of the Argent Shroud. Our headquarters lie west of here, in the Sanctum Miraculous." She pointed to the tower. "If you will accompany us, my lord, I will gladly take you to our canoness." "That would do well," said Akalor. "The sooner I am able to coordinate with the surviving imperial leadership on this world, the better. Is your mistress in command?" "Overall command rests in the hands of the Mordian General Luthor Dvorgin. He is a good man, a faithful man. It was truly a blessing of the Emperor that you appeared when and where you did, my lord," said the Palatine, her eyes shining with wonder. "I see you have rescued one of the Emperor's martyrs. She is blessed. I will present her to the canoness, for such grace cannot be ignored." "Martyr?" asked Akalor. "She lives?" "My lord, since the arch-enemy invaded, they have preyed upon soldiers and civilians without distinction," Emmanuel said. "Whenever they turn their attention to the latter, we honor the sacrifice of these imperial servants by making martyrs of them." "You allow them to draw the foe's attention so that you may strike and eliminate them," said Vikalan, apprehending the implication immediately. "Could you not instead intercede to save these imperial servants from the traitor Astartes?" asked Akalor. "The Emperor saves those who save themselves, my lord," she replied with a zealot certainty. "It is his will." "Bones of old earth," Vikalan said privately. 500 years' experience of their cold fanaticism, and I will never get used to it." Akalor muted his suit voxmeter so he could speak with Vikalan. "If these warriors' faith helps them fight, I see the value in it. How they choose to express that faith is no business of ours, unless it hampers our mission." "To serve is all," countered Vikalan, "but service is best done willingly." "Enough. Any moment could bring the outcry of detection, and with it the risk of failure. The seconds race. Hold your silence for the moment," said Akalor, reopening his vox to the sister. "Lead us to your canoness," he said to the Palatine. "But make no mistake, we are taking the woman with us. She will not be left here to die." Emmanuel looked confused. "But of course, why would I leave her here to die?" Then she did something that surprised Akalor greatly. Slinging her bolt gun on its shoulder strap, she went to Varsilian and held out her arms. "Give her to me, so that I might ease your way and bear my sister in the faith." Varsilian looked to Akalor. "Do as she says. We're wasting time." Gently, Varsilian lowered the injured female. Emmanuel easily took her and cradled her. You would martyr her one moment and rescue her the next? Akalor asked.
This one will be honored above all others, said Emmanuel, a tone communicating that she felt this self-evident. She witnessed the arrival of the Emperor's custodians. You, my holy lords, have blessed her. She may yet be declared a saint.
Just what this world needs. Another saint, Vikalan muttered. Chapter 19. The Balance Shifts. Golden Giants. Miracle. The balance was shifting. Fort Bastabus had fallen. Luther Dvorgin looked over the casualty figures again. The Ladovians had nearly been wiped out. He put the missive paper down on the desk with the rest. None of them bore good news. He resisted rubbing the tiredness out of his eyes. Never show weakness in front of your soldiers, he thought. Exhaustion, hunger, frustration, despair. These things stayed between you and the Emperor. Dvorgin took up a stylus from the map table to update one of the orbital picts. It was getting difficult to read them for all the overlapping annotations. Canoness Imelda Veritas had several of her sisters making updated copies, but the work was constantly outpaced by the changing face of the theatre. Stylus, map table. Jests as grim as this campaign. The stylus was a sliver of bone. The map table was a tomb. Even the chart desk was little more than a joke, its neat hollows suggesting a level of knowledge they simply did not have. The attack was coming soon. Dvorgin suppressed a sigh and tried to formulate a plan to reinforce the perimeter. However, he could not shut out the chatter passing between the command staff as they tried to make something meaningful out of this slow defeat. Third supply party to make it through to the Clarion spires. The cell there is well enough armed now, but the enemy and the blood flux have... No, we've not heard from the 35 platoon in 6 days now. I think it's time to... Rebuff from Cache Delphi Cato with heavy casualties. Last contact, the Sister Superior advised that she was going to try to lose their pursuers in the catacombs before... Line of the Faithful Grace Canal. If we can... Anyone have any news on Sister Clarita's Seraphim? They were pushing north of the processional Worthy Suffering and... More damned heretics. We'll need to... Confirmed lost. Dvorgin swayed. He took a deep breath. The air reeked of incense, sweat, and dried blood. The Sisters Hospitaller had set up a triage station high up in the sanctum the day before, as casualties flooded in from a counteroffensive at Coral Cross. They had succeeded in holding the Aqua Exchanger shrines, but the butcher's bill had been high. His eyes strayed to the casualty lists again. If we keep this up, there'll be more than enough food and water to go around, he thought. Conscious he was staring blankly, Dvorgin stirred himself. He made his annotations, cross-checking with his flickering data slate to make sure he had it right. Matters were bad enough without mistakes. Every penstroke condemned men to death. Lieutenant Stainer was suddenly at his elbow. The younger man proffered a flask. "Spoils of war, sir," he said, his tone dry as always. Dvorgin took the canteen. The water inside was tepid and tasted of chemicals, but he was desperately grateful for it. He made himself drink only a modest amount before passing the canteen back. "Anything to report, Stainer?" "Successful reconnaissance of St. Claytor's span. The report's all in here." Stainer produced another data slate and neatly swapped it with the one Dvorgin held. "Sir," Stainer paused. "Yes, Stainer," Dvorgin said, as he read. "On a personal note, sir, I request an operational update regarding when you last had rations or took a sleep shift." Dvorgin frowned at the lieutenant. Stainer met his gaze with his infuriatingly mild expression. "Veritas put you up to that little comment." "Why do you say so, sir?" "I should write you up to the commissariat for impertinence, Lieutenant." "Very good, sir. Shall I locate Commissar Shalim for you, sir? The last report has him overseeing the platoons within the Basilica of Grace 2 days ago." "Don't be an arse, Stainer. That's half the district away," said Dvorgin with a scowl. "Very good, sir," said the lieutenant. "The Emperor rewards the forthright with honest toil, Lieutenant. I shall take your observation under advisement. You, meanwhile, will analyze the recon intelligence, cross-reference it with all the other reports to date, and compile a concise and comprehensive strategic report to be delivered to myself and the Canoness upon my waking. The enemy are probing our defences on all sides, but when they come, they'll come over that bloody bridge, I'm sure of it."
"As the Emperor wills, General," Stainer replied, taking the data slate back from Dvorgin.
"Concise and comprehensive," repeated Dvorgin, then turned away. "The lad will do well," he thought, "provided any of us makes it off Gathalamor alive."
With rationing becoming stricter, enemy forces pressuring their last strongpoints, and no word whatsoever from the wider Imperium, the chances of that seemed fainter by the day. The enemy were tightening their grip, and with Bastabus eliminated, they would have more of their strength free to squeeze the last of them harder.
"Even if we manage to hold the damned Void Port, what then?" he thought. "How long can we hold? It would take a damned miracle for—"
He stopped. There was a commotion coming from outside. Dvorgin sought out Canoness Veritas amongst the crowd of personnel. Their eyes met.
"What in the Emperor's name is that?"
he shouted over to Veritas.
"Are we under attack?"
He strained his ears.
"Is that singing?"
He pushed his way through the command center to her. "It is not the sound of battle," said Veritas. "Come." They went into the corridor. The sanctum had become increasingly crammed, with troops billeted as high as the peak after the collapse of various redoubts. Tired soldiers stood from their resting places in statue niches and from atop sarcophagi, suddenly alert.
"Those are your warriors singing," said Dvorgin. "Why?"
The Canoness frowned, put her face deeper into her gorget, and exchanged hurried words via Vox that Dvorgin couldn't hear, but the look on her face told him something amazing had occurred. It lit up, physically so, he could have sworn it, radiating light that made her lined face appear young again. She reached out for his hand, taking it in warm metal. "Come with me, General, for I have glad tidings." She drew him to a door that opened onto the outside. The balcony was deep, the balustrade some yards from the door, and she took him to the edge so they could look down into Ascension Stairs' broken streets. He squinted. He could see movement on the road, more people than he'd seen out in the open since the invasion began. There was a line of black among the crowds, and golden light from the middle, but his old eyes saw it all as a blur. "Glory, glory," Veritas was saying. "Glory, glory, praise be to him on Terra that he sends his servants to us now." Tears ran down her face.
"What is it? Imelda, what can you see?"
"Glory, glory," she kept saying. "Oh, glory, glory, glory." He extricated his hand from the Canoness, pulled his magnoculars out of the case at his belt, and brought them to his face. The crowd below leapt towards him, and he saw the rapt expressions on individual faces. They were passing lanterns and candles out, so that in the shadow of the deep street a river of flame was spreading. All the people were singing now, taking up the hymn of the returning sisters, so that music filled the city, and Impresentia remembered what life had been like not so long ago. He pointed the magnoculars towards the middle of the road. He caught the sisters first, their armour reflecting the dawn and the flames. Palatine Emmanuel was at their head, a dazed-looking woman held up by her and another battle sister. He moved his view back along the small procession. A dazzling luminance flared, hiding what was there, and he winced. When his eyes adjusted and he saw the source, he almost dropped the magnoculars.
"The Emperor's holy shit,"
he said, quite forgetting himself. Veritas didn't notice his blasphemy. She was on her knees now, sobbing, hands clasped in prayer. "Praise be," she was saying, over and over again. "We are blessed, we are blessed, praise be." Dvorgin and Veritas met their guests at the east gate. Sandbagged positions manned by Mordians flanked the way in, but they stood in front of their heavy weapons, duty forgotten, mouths agape. There were civilians everywhere, singing, crying. Many had thrown themselves prostrate upon the ground and were wailing incoherently. Dvorgin tugged at his uniform, suddenly ridiculously mindful of how shabby he had become.
"How does one greet a demigod?" he thought.
The men he'd gathered as an honor guard were similarly scruffy. They were Mordians, and that meant they had a certain image to preserve, and he panicked that they were not doing so. Veritas was flanked by Seraphim, who sang hosannas in beautiful harmony. Palatine Gracia Emmanuel reached the bottom of the 100 steps leading up from the street. The injured woman was taken away by Hospitallers, and the party mounted the stairs, the giants towering over the Sisters of Battle.
Throne! Adeptus Custodes, Dvorgin thought. The Emperor's saints, his boon companions who guard him as he suffers on the throne of terror for the betterment of mankind. Dimly recalled myths. The rational side of him tried to reject the notion that they were actually there, to insist that his eyes must be mistaken. But they were there. His own angels, larger than life and as golden as the sun. Dvorgin blinked in bewilderment, unable to accept what he saw. There was something else growing in him, the slow rising of hope. Emmanuel reached the top of the stairs and flung out her arm behind her. She wore her helmet at her belt, and her face was full of rapture. "Canoness," she said excitedly, "the Emperor has answered our prayers." The figures behind her were huge, taller than Emmanuel, and they had not yet reached the top of the flight. Their leader grew bigger and bigger as he ascended the last few steps. He was massively armoured in powered plate of red and gold, his conical helm capped with a crest as bright as blood. He stopped, surveying the group as his men joined him, flanking him two to each side. They were armed with shields as big as doors, and wore swords nearly as long as Dvorgin was tall. One carried a banner pole instead of a shield, bearing 100 pounds of golden metal, as if it were no inconvenience to him at all. The leader passed his sword and shield to two of his companions, reached up with both hands, unsealed his great helm, and lifted it. Dvorgin had a sudden terror that he would go blind at the sight of the custodian's face, so beautiful it would be, and he flinched, but the warrior was human-looking enough, though perfect. He showed a face like something carved from stone, a square jaw and a firm slash of a mouth, a flat, broad nose between cheekbones that looked as though they could shrug off a bolt shell. Narrow brown eyes, hard as gems, their irises shot through with fine gold streaks. Cables ran into interface ports in his left temple, across the side of his head. His skin was golden in the reflected morning light coming off his armour. He was of middling age, it seemed, but his eyes said he was far, far older than he looked. He moved with a grace that Dvorgin had never seen in a human being, even encased in that walking tank of an armoured suit, and though he had a warrior's presence, there was no mark or scar on his face, as if he were so skilled no enemy could touch him. Dvorgin dropped to one knee, without meaning to. There was a divinity to this towering warrior. It took the general a moment to realize that every Mordian and battle sister had knelt too. "Am I doing this right?" thought Dvorgin, semi-coherently. "My lord, we are blessed indeed," said Veritas, finding her voice. "To think that the Emperor has sent us his own custodian guard to lead us to victory. We are blessed, blessed." Custodian guard. An impossibility, surely, that this being had stood in the presence of the Emperor. The Emperor, the master of mankind himself. Dvorgin couldn't stop thinking it. The giant inclined his head in recognition of Veritas's words. "We come not to perform that task, though we will help you if we can. The Emperor sends us to see that the gate of Gathalamor stands open, that Rabute Gilliman's avenging hosts might pass freely through it upon their road to war." "My lord," Dvorkin managed to croak, "the Primarch is coming here." The giant looked down at him. It was an appraising look, the look a man gave a useful object. "The Indomitus crusade has begun," said the giant, as though that explained everything. "My lord? A crusade has been called?" asked Veritas. Dvorgin was glad she had. He wasn't sure he could have mustered the courage. The custodian, Dvorgin forced himself to think the word, smiled. Just a brief turning up of the corners of his mouth, but the effect was electrifying. "The greatest crusade in mankind's history." A murmur of holy joy went through the crowd. "You have been cut off here, have you not, fighting without sign of the Emperor's favour, yet enduring nonetheless?" asked the custodian. "Our faith has never wavered," the canoness answered fiercely. "It is to all your credit," said the custodian, addressing everyone on the steps. Only the servitors standing sentry at the doors were excluded from the ripple of hope these words brought. But now Dvorgin realized even the mindless sentinels had not challenged this newcomer. "I am Shield Captain Akalor," he said to them all, And I bring you word that you do not fight alone.
He looked about the rapturous crowd before turning to Veritas and lowering his voice.
We must take counsel. Privately. We have much to discuss, and time is growing short.
Chapter 20. Strategies discussed. An exchange of favors. The mist.
The Indomitus Crusade is the greatest military undertaking of our age, the counteroffensive that will see the enemy driven back into the raging storms whence they came, said Akalor. Gathalamor is of utmost strategic importance. The command center had been cleared of all personnel but the highest officers of the theater. Dvorgin, Veritas, Princess Jessivane, Colonel Chieftain Jurgen, and their immediate subordinates made a colorful display. The blows you have already struck will be immortalized, Akalor continued, for they will be the first of countless more.
Dvorgin heard prayers of thanks. The audience were too awed for anything more effusive.
Your Emperor asks more of you yet, however, said Akalor. We are but the heralds of this invasion. Barring the caprice of the warp, our comrades are but days behind us. There is scant time to act against the threat to the fleet.
A threat, said Veritas. Of what kind?
That we do not know, said another of the custodians, the big one who had named himself Vikalan. He had removed his helm to show a stern face framed by white hair. Sorcery, ambush, who can say? We know only that it exists. We must know every strategic detail of your operation, and everything you can tell us of the enemy.
Dvorgin moved forward to the chart desk. He willed his knees not to betray him.
My lord, at once, he said, gesturing at the cartolith. After the initial attack, we managed to hold Ascension Stair Spaceport and other locales, but I'm ashamed to say we have been losing territory steadily for the last few weeks. Today we received notice that Fort Bastabus had fallen. This was one of the last major strongpoints we had in this part of the continent. Where is it? Akalor asked. 50 miles up the coast. It was being held by a demi-regiment of Ladovians. They are all now dead. The enemy has been preparing to launch a major offensive from the direction of St. Cletus Span. I think now that Bastabus is gone, that attack is imminent.
I have faith that we have the strength to endure until the crusade arrives, said Veritas.
We are perhaps not lost, agreed Dvorgin, pointing at the jagged slash in the landscape. If you were to lend us your support, we could preempt this attack and push them back, and destroy the artillery threatening our void shielding. What are your plans thereafter? Asked Akalor. They were to hold a line on the far side of the bridge, to give ourselves a little breathing room. But now you're here, we could retake the Blessed Bastion.
Dvorgin refocused the map on a tall tower partway between Ascension Stair and the Macro Cathedral.
The Blessed Bastion was Impresentia's primary command and control center. It should have been impregnable, but it was taken from us by treachery from within on the first day of the invasion. They have a Vox Blunt in operation there, crippling our communications. With the Bastion back in our hands, we would be able to better coordinate what assets remain on this world. What are their numbers? Asked Vikalan. Many cultists, some heretic Astartes, said Dvorgin. We do not have exact figures.
Jessivane spoke up. House Kamadar sallies out daily to press the foe back from the canyon, but our war grounds are increasingly limited, she said. They overran the outer defences a month ago, and now we cannot dare Cletus Span, but must pass south under fire, so we do not know their strength on the far side of the canyon anymore.
It is deep and provides a formidable ditch, said Akalor, looking at the map. The bridge is the only way across. It is a difficult assault for them. Nevertheless, I judge it their best chance for a quick victory, said Dvorgin. You can see how the ground around the port limits their movements to the south, east, and north. The western districts are most vulnerable. The equal elevation either side of the canyon gives them a marginal advantage, as they have more guns, and the bridge leads right into the heart of the Void Port. They have moved up their bigger artillery. The Princess Jessivane attempted to destroy the guns several times, but was driven back, and our void shields are now sorely tested by them. Our power supply is on a knife edge. We possess barely enough capacity to power both defense lasers and shields simultaneously, and I'm sure that as soon as the enemy become aware of that, the fleet will attack. Then we are finished. So, if you can push them back from the District of Heavens at the other end of St. Clatus span, then you can remove the artillery that threatens your voids, said Vikelan, thus negating the threat of ground assault. That is your plan? Yes, said Dvorgin.
My main concern is the orbital laser batteries, said Jesavane. If we lose those, Kamidar will be open to direct attack from orbit. My knights would not be able to leave our dropkeep, and we would lose one of the most potent forces still in play on this world.
They could have destroyed you already, said Akalor. The enemy wish to capture this port intact, said Vikelan. It is why they have not moved on you yet. What is your void strength, if I may ask, my lords? Asked Dvorgin. You think to use our void assets to harry them in space, perhaps drive the fleet into range of your ground lasers? Discount the thought, said Akalor. You would lose this port, said Vikelan. Your lives and the planet. You have made them cautious. Your strength is almost spent. If they knew how precarious your situation is, they would attack now. Fortune favors you, for the moment.
The Emperor favors us, said Jesavane.
Do not think to test either Fortune or the Emperor, said Vikelan. Yet help is coming, said Akalor. Most pressing is the threat to the Crusade, said Vikelan. The enemy's commanders have established themselves in the Emperor Exultant, the macro-cathedrum of Asclepius, the builder, yes? Dvorgin nodded and shifted the focus of the cartolith again. That structure looks near impossible to defend effectively against concerted assault, said Akalor.
My lord, it is true my sisters and I were unable to hold it, said Veritas. However, we were outnumbered, facing betrayal, and burdened by the duty of salvaging the most holy relics. Our enemies possess far greater strength, heretic Astartes, and Throne alone knows what numbers of faithless. They have had weeks to fortify the structure.
The macro-cathedrum is almost 2 days' march from our current location, my lord, said Dvorgin. It would cost us dearly in lives to attack, and if we fail, we lose everything. Serving the Emperor is a costly business, General, said Vikelan. If the cathedral were not a fortress before, said Akalor, it will make a poor fortress still, no matter how well Perturabo's sons reinforce it. You mean to attack? We do, said Vikelan. But you are only 5, said Dvorgin.
Princess Jesavane laughed. They are the Emperor's own archangels, General.
But only 5,
he thought again, nervous they might catch his thoughts and hold him to account for his lack of faith. No divine judgment came. Akalor and his lieutenant were instead examining the macro-cathedrum closely.
Wide open to attack, said Vikelan.
If that is so, why are they there? We need clarity before action. Vikelan, contact Mistress Sangar. Have her prepare Brother Sergeant Lucerne's warriors for deployment. Can your void and aerial defenses provide a covered approach vector? He asked Dvorgin.
Of course, my lord, said Dvorgin.
He hesitated.
There are more of you? Not us. Adeptus Astartes, said Vikelan. 30 of them.
Murmurs went around the room. Akalor ignored their excitement.
Their numbers will not matter if they are blown from the sky. Hastius, what is the probability of safe landing, given the capabilities of the vertical defense grid?
Vikelan looked over the representation of the port.
54%. There are enough ground-to-orbit batteries to establish a safe approach corridor in the void. The risk is in atmosphere. Slim odds.
But good enough, said Akalor.
Tell Sangar to send down Master of Astropath's Ashmael with Sergeant Lucerne. She is to come. I will not accept any denial.
Dvorgin couldn't imagine anyone refusing an order from the custodians. Akalor addressed the assembled officers.
We will aid you in securing the bastion, but we must deal with this threat. Once the bastion is in your hands, we will require you to make an assault upon the cathedrum to mask our own attack upon it. You will provide us with all information you have regarding the macro-cathedrum and the catacombs. You have a prisoner, yes?
We do, said Dvorgin, though she knows very little.
Take me to her, said Akalor. I will be the judge of that myself. Time ran dry for Ismadela. They had hurt her, and now she floated upon a mist of pain between the realms of life and death. Not long now for heart to beat and blood to flow.
"Great ones," she said,
though whether they were words or only thoughts, she could no longer tell. A fleeting echo responded, making her own words mocking.
"Great ones," it said,
and she had a vision of the cold stone niche she had snatched a few moments of rest in, and knew the echo disapproved.
"Aid me,"
she cried. There had been faith in her before, once for the Emperor, and then for the great powers. Now she was alone.
"Aid me."
Laughter bubbled under the echo. She could feel things moving in the mist. They were coming for her. She had failed in her service to the Pantheon, and she would pay. She was dimly aware of the room where her body sat, leaking out its life onto the floor, the place where the brides of the Emperor had spoken kind words, even as they cut her and burned her. One watched over her now, her face hidden behind a mask of ceramite. The rest had gone.
"Please,"
she mumbled through broken teeth, and she did not know whether she spoke to the sister or to the echoes in the mist.
"Please,"
the voices in the mist mocked. The glowing substance of it stirred. A scaled fin rose and plunged back within the vapours. Terrified now, she tried to push her way back into her body, but it was shutting down, part by part, and rejected her spirit. The mist waited, and drawing her into it with slow purpose, threatening worse beyond. In the room of her death, the door opened, and a blazing light shone through. Where it touched her failing form, the cult tattoos burned, spreading blisters across ragged flesh. But where it lit upon the brands the brides of the Emperor had given her, a coolness grew. "Look at me," a voice said. It used the high speech of the Emperor. For the first time, she understood it completely. Her head hung loose on dying muscles. "Look at me," the voice commanded, and it was louder than the peals of Asclepiadus's cathedral before the holy ones had come and thrown down all the bells. Against her will, she raised up her face. A golden giant stood before her, ablaze with solving light. She wept when she saw it, for she knew in an instant that she had taken the wrong path, and that here true judgment was. A metal hand cupped her chin. Bloody tears ran down her ruined face. "What were you digging for?" the voice said. She could not see its features. Light shone too brightly from its eyes. She felt the Emperor look upon her through him, and though she had turned her back upon him, she knew that she was seen.
"Forgive me,"
she thought to shriek, but her words were a painful mumble. The voices in the mist laughed. The golden hand was cool and gentle. "It is not in my power to forgive you anything, but I can take away your pain. Tell me, what were you digging for?"
"Don't tell," the voices in the mist said. "Don't tell."
Ismadela wavered between speech and silence, as she wavered between life and death, but in the golden light around this true angel of the Emperor, she could not stay silent.
"Bukharis," she gasped. "We were looking for something called Bukharis."
"Traitor!"
hissed the voices.
"Traitor!"
"For what end?" asked the golden giant, who seemed to understand her language, as different as it was.
"Judgment,"
she murmured. The mist was calling to her. She could not tarry.
"Judgment on the faithless."
"A weapon?" the giant demanded.
"I don't know."
Her muscles felt they would fail, but she managed to shake her head within the giant's hand. "Do you know more than this? Answer truthfully. I shall know."
No, nothing," she said.
The giant held her a moment longer, weighing the truth of her words, and Ismadela felt her soul measured along with them. "Then be at peace," he said. The hand tightened and twisted, snapping her neck. No blessing was hers, nor salvation. The mist enveloped her, and the echoes laughed. She screamed as chaos gave its reward, and the creatures of the warp began to feed. Akalor answered the Battle Sister's unspoken challenge. She had suffered enough, he said to her. She knew no more.
He paused, then continued, burying his rage under a calm, commanding voice. The injuries inflicted on the woman in the chair were obscene.
Think not of her as a heretic, sister, and consider instead how you would have fared were you in her place. There are many paths to unrighteousness, and they are far easier to find than those that lead to the Emperor's light.
The sister bowed her head and called for one of her fellows to remove the body.
Akalor left the stink of bowels and blood behind, fury stoked, for though he had little pity for those who worked against the Imperium, he dearly wished humans would acknowledge their own weaknesses and behave accordingly.
Chapter 21. A Moment's Reflection. Homunculus. Record and Archive. Shipmistress Ebel Sanger worried and paced the interior of her cabin. It was well appointed, though not opulently, her furnishings being of quality without unnecessary adornment. All were bolted down against violent manoeuvring. She paced past the torsewood desk with its high-backed chair, its inbuilt cogitator unit, piles of books, papers, her dormant cyberslave, and ancient astrosextant. She passed her bunk, her private head, 3 ornate firearms of Martian manufacture mounted on the wall, shelves housing her library and logbooks. Sanger had discovered long ago that if one wished to converse with the Adeptus Custodes, one required a solid grounding in a wide variety of lore. She passed a beautiful painting by Aspasian of Admiral Ravensburg's victory at Gethsemane.